Hi, I'm Riley. My father called my language degrees worthless party tricks and said I was wasting my life on dead-end hobbies. But when his elite reconnaissance unit got trapped behind enemy lines in the mountains of Valdoria, and I was the only person in a 200-mile radius who could speak fluent Mandarin to negotiate their rescue, his tune changed real quick. The kicker? I'd been trying to tell him for 3 years that I worked as a classified military translator. Want to guess what he said when he found out who'd been secretly saving American lives overseas? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I grew up in the small military town of Copper Ridge, Montana, where success was measured in 2 ways: how many push-ups you could do, and how loud you could yell, "Hooah!" My father, Colonel Jackson Thorne, was a living legend at Fort Sentinel. 32 years of service, 2 Purple Hearts, and a reputation that made grown soldiers nervous when he walked into a room. Me? I was the disappointment, who spent her teenage years buried in Mandarin textbooks instead of ROTC manuals. Riley's got her head in the clouds again, Dad would grunt whenever he caught me practicing Mandarin characters at the kitchen table. Wasting time on Chinese squiggles when she should be preparing for something useful. This something useful he had in mind was following his footsteps into a traditional military career. Infantry, combat, real soldier stuff. Not what he called my academic nonsense. But here's what Colonel Jackson Thorne didn't know about his disappointing daughter. I'd been fluent in Mandarin since I was 19, also Japanese, Korean, and conversational in 6 other languages. While he was lecturing me about getting serious about life, I was already working, just not where he could see me. See, after college, I'd landed a position with the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, top secret clearance, military contractor. I spent my days translating intercepted communications and my nights on video calls with intelligence operatives stationed across Southeast Asia. The pay was incredible, the work was critical to national security, and I was damn good at it. But I couldn't tell him. Classification levels meant my own father couldn't know what I really did for a living. So every time I came home to Copper Ridge for holidays, he'd launch into the same speech. 26 years old and still playing with foreign languages like some kind of hobby. When are you going to get a real job? When are you going to make something of yourself? I'd sit there, biting my tongue, knowing I was literally helping prevent international incidents while he thought I was some kind of perpetual graduate student living off savings. The worst part? He'd do it in front of his military buddies. Last Christmas, I walked into the kitchen to find him holding court with 3 other officers, coffee mugs in hand, all of them in civilian clothes but still carrying themselves like they were on parade. My daughter's become one of those academic types, he was saying, shaking his head. Speaks Chinese or something. Completely useless in the real world, but hey, maybe she can order takeout without looking at the menu. They all laughed. Not cruel laughter, just the casual dismissal that comes from men who've never needed to understand anything beyond orders and tactics. I grabbed a water bottle from the fridge and walked out without saying a word. What was I supposed to do? Pull out my security clearance and start rattling off the number of lives I'd helped save through accurate translation work? Sure, that would go over well with Homeland Security. Mom used to try to defend me in her quiet way. Jackson, leave the girl alone. She's smart and she's passionate about what she does. Passion doesn't pay the bills, Dorothy, he'd snap back. And it sure doesn't serve the country. If only he knew. The irony was killing me. Every month, I'd get commendations from superiors I couldn't name, working on projects I couldn't discuss, contributing to missions that sometimes made the evening news with vague references to successful intelligence operations and prevented security threats. But to my father, I was just Riley, the dreamer who'd never amounted to anything. 3 months ago, things got worse. I'd been working on an especially sensitive project involving North Korean communications intercepts. Long hours, High stress, the kind of work that keeps you awake at night because you know lives depend on getting every nuance right. When I finally made it home for a weekend visit, I was exhausted. Dad took one look at me and launched into lecture mode. "Look at you," he said, gesturing at my tired eyes and coffee-stained sweater. "This is what happens when you chase fantasies instead of building a real career. You're burning yourself out on nonsense." I almost broke, almost told him everything. The security briefings, the late-night emergency translations, the thank you messages from field operatives whose lives had been saved by intelligence I'd helped decode. Instead, I just nodded and went to bed early. But here's the thing about keeping secrets from family. Eventually, the truth has a way of forcing itself into the light. And sometimes, that moment comes when the stakes are higher than hurt feelings or family pride. Sometimes, it comes when lives are literally hanging in the balance, and the worthless party tricks your father mocked turn out to be the only thing standing between his unit and disaster. That moment was about to arrive sooner than either of us expected. Want to know what happened when my father's elite reconnaissance team got stranded in hostile territory, and I was the only person qualified to save them? This is where the story gets really interesting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing intercepted communications from the South China Sea. My secure phone buzzed with a familiar number, Mom's landline back in Copper Ridge. "Riley, honey," Mom's voice was strained, careful. "Your father's been deployed." "Emergency assignment. I can't say much over the phone, but..." She didn't need to say more. Emergency deployments meant one thing in Dad's line of work. Something had gone very, very wrong somewhere in the world, and they needed his expertise to fix it. "Is he okay?" I asked, minimizing the classified documents on my screen. "For now. But Riley, he looked worried when he left. More worried than I've seen him in years. He took his dress blues with him." Dress blues on a deployment meant one of two things: diplomatic meetings or memorial services. Neither option made me feel better. After hanging up, I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting. Despite everything, despite the constant criticism, the dismissive comments, the way he made me feel like a failure, he was still my father. The idea of him in danger somewhere made my chest tight. 2 weeks passed without word. Mom called occasionally with updates that weren't really updates. Still no contact. That's normal for this type of mission. You know how it is. But I didn't know how it was. For all Dad's lectures about military life, he'd never actually shared the details of what he did. Special operations was need to know, and apparently, his own daughter didn't need to know. I threw myself deeper into my work at the Defense Language Institute. The Monterey facility was buzzing with activity. Tensions were rising in the South Pacific, and our translation services were in high demand. I was pulling 12-hour days, processing everything from diplomatic cables to intercepted radio chatter. My supervisor, Dr. Amanda Chen, a brilliant linguist who'd helped design half the military's translation protocols, noticed my distraction during our weekly briefing. "Riley, you seem off your game lately. Everything all right?" I hesitated. We weren't supposed to discuss personal matters that might affect our clearance status, but Dr. Chen had always been understanding. "My father's deployed somewhere. Can't say where, obviously. It's just, we don't have the best relationship, but I'm worried." She nodded knowingly. "Military family?" "Special operations. Colonel Jackson Thorne, if that name means anything to you." Her eyebrows shot up. "The Jackson Thorne? Riley, your father is a legend in certain circles. His reconnaissance work in Afghanistan was textbook material for years." I blinked. "You know him?" "By reputation. And if he's deployed right now," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "Let's just say there are some very delicate situations developing in regions where linguistic expertise is absolutely critical. The way she said it made my stomach drop. In our line of work, delicate situations requiring linguistic expertise was code for international incidents, where communication barriers could mean the difference between diplomacy and disaster. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the last conversation I'd had with Dad before he left. I'd called to check in, and he'd answered from what sounded like an airport. "Riley, why are you calling? I'm about to board a flight." "I just wanted to say be safe, Dad, wherever you're going." There had been a long pause. Then, in a softer voice than usual, "I know we don't see eye to eye on your career choices, kiddo. But for what it's worth, your mother thinks you're brilliant." "What do you think?" I'd asked before I could stop myself. Another pause. "I think you're my daughter, and I want you to be happy, even if I don't understand what makes you happy." It wasn't exactly a heartfelt apology, but coming from Colonel Jackson Thorne, it was practically a declaration of love. Now, 2 weeks later, I was pacing my apartment at midnight, wondering if that would be the last real conversation we'd ever have. My secure work phone rang. Late-night calls were unusual, but not unheard of. Sometimes, urgent translations couldn't wait for business hours. Riley Thorne, Defense Language Institute. "Ms. Thorne, this is Major Patricia Williams, Joint Operations Command. I need you to come in immediately. We have a situation requiring your specific skill set." I glanced at the clock. 12:47 a.m. What kind of situation? "The kind we don't discuss over the phone. How quickly can you get to the facility?" 20 minutes later, I was badging into the secure wing of the Defense Language Institute, following Major Williams through corridors I'd never seen before. She was a compact woman with steel-gray hair, and the kind of posture that suggested she'd seen more combat than most people see action movies. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels," she said as we walked. "A reconnaissance unit has gone dark in the Valdorian Mountains. Last communication was 4 days ago." Valdoria. The small Eastern European nation had been in the news lately. Tensions with neighboring countries, reports of military buildups, whispers of international involvement. "How does this involve me?" I asked, though I was already getting a sick feeling in my stomach. Major Williams stopped walking and turned to face me. "The unit that's missing? It's led by Colonel Jackson Thorne." The world tilted slightly. "My father?" "We weren't aware of the family connection when we called you in. That's unfortunate. But, Miss Thorne, you're the only Mandarin specialist within 500 miles with the security clearance for this operation." "Mandarin? But Valdoria is in Eastern Europe. They speak." "The situation is more complicated than that," she said grimly. "Your father's unit was investigating reports of foreign military advisors in the region. We have reason to believe Chinese operatives are involved." We entered a war room I'd only heard about in whispers. Multiple screens showed satellite imagery, communication logs, and what looked like terrain maps of mountainous regions. A dozen people in military uniforms and civilian clothes clustered around various workstations. 12 hours ago, Major Williams continued, we intercepted a radio transmission from the Valdorian Mountains. It was mostly static, but we managed to clean up about 30 seconds of audio. She nodded to a technician, who hit a button. Through the speakers came crackling static, then voices speaking rapid Mandarin. I caught fragments. "American soldiers, trapped, negotiate, tomorrow at dawn." My blood went cold. They have my father's unit. "We believe so, and Miss Thorne, we need to know exactly what they're saying." Every word could be the difference between a successful rescue and an international incident. I stared at the speakers, my mind racing. All those years of Dad dismissing my language studies as worthless hobbies. All those lectures about getting a real job and serving my country in a meaningful way. If only he knew that his daughter's party tricks might be the only thing that could save his life. The next 6 hours blurred together in a haze of caffeine, encrypted communications, and mounting dread. Major Williams had assembled what she called a crisis response team, a collection of military strategists, intelligence analysts, and communication specialists who looked like they hadn't slept in days. I sat at a workstation equipped with the most advanced audio enhancement software I'd ever seen, listening to fragments of intercepted radio transmissions over and over again. Each pass through the static revealed new details, and none of them were good. "The transmission originated from grid coordinates here," said Lieutenant Torres, pointing to a satellite image of jagged mountain terrain. "It's a natural valley formation, heavily forested with multiple cave systems, perfect for hiding a small force." "Or holding prisoners," added Dr. Sarah Kim, a hostage negotiation specialist who'd been called in from Fort Bragg. I pulled off my headphones and rubbed my temples. "I've isolated 4 distinct voices speaking Mandarin, 3 men, 1 woman. The woman appears to be in charge. She's giving orders about quote, maintaining security and preparing for the morning exchange." Major Williams leaned forward. "Exchange? That's where it gets complicated." I pulled up my translation notes on the screen. "They keep referring to something called the package and mention needing, quote, verification from the Americans before proceeding. But there's also discussion about leverage." The room went quiet. In hostage situations, leverage meant only one thing. "They have something they think we want," Dr. Kim said grimly, "and they're planning to use it to get something from us." I played another audio fragment, this one cleaner than the others. A male voice speaking in crisp, educated Mandarin. "The Americans sent their best reconnaissance team. We have them exactly where we want them. Tomorrow we find out what their government is willing to sacrifice for their return." Major Williams stood abruptly. "This isn't just a rescue operation anymore. This is a potential diplomatic crisis. If word gets out that a U.S. Special Operations unit has been captured by Chinese operatives in Valdorian territory." She didn't need to finish. International incidents had started over less. "There's something else," I said, replaying the clearest section of audio. "The woman mentions a timeline. They're talking about a 48-hour window before, quote, escalation becomes necessary. That was recorded yesterday, which means—" "We have less than 36 hours, Lieutenant Torres concluded. A new voice entered the conversation. General Morrison, a silver-haired man who carried himself like someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions before breakfast. He'd apparently been briefed while I was working on the translations. "Miss Thorne," he said, settling into a chair across from me. "I understand Colonel Thorne is your father." "Yes, sir." "And I understand you're one of our most skilled Mandarin interpreters." "I do my job, sir." He studied me for a moment. "Your service record indicates you've handled high-stress translation work before. Operations where lives depended on getting every nuance exactly right." I nodded. It was true. I'd translated everything from hostage negotiations to diplomatic crises, always under pressure, always knowing that a misunderstood phrase could have catastrophic consequences. "This situation is different," General Morrison continued. "This time it's personal. Are you going to be able to maintain objectivity?" The question hit harder than I expected. Could I? Could I listen to strangers discussing my father's fate like he was a chess piece and provide clinical, accurate translations? "Sir, with respect, my personal feelings don't change what the words mean. Whether it's my father or a stranger, Mandarin translates the same way." Dr. Kim looked up from her laptop. "Actually, General, having a personal connection might work in our favor. Miss Thorne will be more motivated to catch subtle details, emotional undertones that could be critical for understanding their true intentions. Or she could miss something important because she's too emotionally invested," countered Major Williams. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I've been doing this job for 6 years. I've never let personal feelings interfere with accurate translation. Not once." General Morrison held up a hand. "Enough. Miss Thorne, you're the best we have available, and we don't have time to debate this. But I need to know, Can you handle hearing detailed discussions about your father's captivity? About potential harm coming to him? I thought about all those years of Dad dismissing my work, calling it worthless, making me feel like I'd never amount to anything in his eyes. Then I thought about that last phone call, the way his voice had softened when he said he wanted me to be happy. I can handle it, sir. He's my father. But right now, he's also an American soldier in enemy hands. I'll do whatever it takes to bring him home. The general nodded approvingly. Good. Because we just intercepted another transmission, and this one is much clearer. Lieutenant Torres handed me a fresh set of headphones. The audio quality was dramatically better. They must have gotten closer to the source or improved their equipment positioning. A woman's voice came through, speaking in Mandarin with a Beijing accent. The American colonel is more valuable than we initially assessed. Intelligence suggests he has knowledge of Operation Nightfall, if we can extract that information. My blood went cold. Operation Nightfall was a classified U.S. military initiative that I knew about only because I'd translated some of the preliminary documentation. If enemy operatives were aware of it, if they thought Dad had detailed knowledge. What is it? Major Williams asked, seeing my expression. They think my father has information about a classified operation. They're not just holding him for ransom or political leverage. They want to interrogate him. The woman's voice continued. Prepare the enhancement protocols. If the colonel proves uncooperative, we have methods to encourage disclosure. Enhancement protocols. Torture, in other words. I yanked off the headphones, my hands shaking. They're going to torture him. They think he knows details about Operation Nightfall, and they're going to torture him to get the information. Dr. Kim leaned forward. Does he? No details about this operation? I don't know, I admitted. Special operations commanders often have compartmentalized knowledge, but if they think he does. General Morrison's jaw tightened. Then we have even less time than we thought. Enhanced interrogation techniques can cause permanent damage or death, especially on someone Colonel Thorne's age. The room erupted in controlled chaos, people making phone calls, typing rapidly on computers, updating maps and timelines. Through it all, I sat frozen, staring at the headphones that had just delivered the worst news possible. My father, the man who thought my language skills were worthless party tricks, was going to be tortured by people speaking the very language he'd mocked me for learning. And I was the only person in this room who could understand exactly what they planned to do to him. Miss Thorne. General Morrison's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. I need you to listen to the rest of that transmission. All of it. I know it's difficult, but we need to understand their full intentions. I put the headphones back on with trembling hands. The woman was still speaking. The exchange location has been confirmed. Dawn, tomorrow. But if they attempt any rescue operations, if they bring military force instead of negotiators. She paused, and another voice, younger, male, finished her sentence. We eliminate the prisoners immediately and withdraw to the secondary location. I translated mechanically, my voice steady despite the terror coursing through my veins. Around me, military personnel absorbed the information with professional calm, but I could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their jaws tightened. There's more, I said, listening to the final portion of the transmission. They're expecting some kind of official response from the U.S. government. Not just military, diplomatic. They want someone with authority to negotiate, someone who can make binding agreements. General Morrison exchanged glances with Major Williams. They want to negotiate directly with Washington. But sir, Lieutenant Torres interjected, if we involve State Department officials, if this becomes a formal diplomatic incident, it becomes public, the general finished. And once it's public, our options become extremely limited. I pulled off the headphones one final time and looked around the room at all these military professionals trying to figure out how to save my father's life. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of something other than fear. These people respected my work. They needed my skills. They were treating me like an essential part of the solution, not like the disappointing daughter who'd chosen the wrong career path. "General," I said, "what if we don't wait for them to make the next move? What if we initiate contact?" The silence that followed my suggestion stretched uncomfortably long. General Morrison studied me with the kind of intense focus that made me understand why soldiers snapped to attention when he entered a room. "Initiate contact how, exactly?" he asked. I took a breath, trying to organize thoughts that were coming too fast. "We know they're monitoring military frequencies. We know they expect some kind of official response. What if we give them one, but on our terms?" Major Williams frowned. "You're suggesting we contact the hostage-takers directly?" "I'm suggesting we use the fact that they want to negotiate. Instead of waiting for their next move, we make one of our own. We control the conversation." Dr. Kim looked intrigued. "It's not entirely unprecedented. Proactive engagement can sometimes shift the psychological dynamic in hostage situations. But it's also risky," Lieutenant Torres added. "If we mishandle the initial contact, then we make things worse," General Morrison finished. "Miss Thorne, what makes you think we can control a conversation with trained operatives?" I gestured toward my workstation, where hours of translated conversations were displayed across multiple screens. "Because I understand them. Not just their words, but their motivations, their concerns, their pressure points." I pulled up one of my analysis documents. "The woman in charge, she's operating under orders from someone higher up the chain. She mentions Beijing's timeline and acceptable parameters multiple times. She's not a rogue agent making independent decisions. She has constraints." General Morrison leaned forward. "What kind of constraints?" "Time, for one. They keep referencing a 48-hour window, but they also talk about extraction protocols and, quote, secondary objectives. This isn't their primary mission. It's become a complication they need to resolve quickly." I clicked to another screen. "And there's something else." In the background of one transmission, I heard someone speaking Russian. Not Mandarin, Russian. Which means this isn't just a Chinese operation. The room went very quiet. Multinational involvement changed everything. "Russian?" Major Williams asked sharply. "You're certain?" "Absolutely." Someone said, "Da, ponimayu." "Yes, I understand." It was brief, but clear. "Which means we're dealing with at least two different intelligence services working together, possibly with different agendas." Dr. Kim was already typing rapidly on her laptop. "That could be leverage. If there are multiple parties involved, there might be disagreements about methodology, timeline, objectives. Or it could mean we're walking into something much bigger than a simple hostage situation," General Morrison countered. I stood up, feeling a surge of confidence I hadn't expected. "Sir, with respect, we're already in something bigger. My father's unit didn't just wander into the wrong place at the wrong time. They were investigating foreign military advisors, and they found exactly what they were looking for." The general's expression shifted slightly. "Continue." "These operatives captured Dad's team because they have something to hide. Something big enough to risk an international incident. But they also can't just eliminate American soldiers without consequences. They need to find a way out of this that doesn't escalate into a full diplomatic crisis." I moved to the large display screen showing the mountain terrain. "What if we offer them exactly that? A quiet resolution that lets everyone save face?" "In exchange for what?" Lieutenant Torres asked. "Information," I said simply. "Not classified intelligence. They already think they know what Dad knows about Operation Nightfall, but information about their operation. Who they're working for, what they're trying to accomplish, how extensive their presence is in Valdoria." Major Williams looked skeptical. "You think they'll trade American hostages for the chance to confess their crimes?" "I think they'll trade American hostages for the chance to complete their mission without starting World War III," I corrected. "Think about it from their perspective." They captured a U.S. Special Operations team by accident. Now they're stuck with prisoners they don't really want, facing potential military retaliation from the most powerful nation on Earth. Dr. Kim nodded slowly. She has a point. From a psychological standpoint, they're probably looking for an exit strategy that doesn't make them look weak to their superiors. General Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the satellite images. Miss Thorne, if we attempt direct contact, you'd be the one doing the talking. Are you prepared for that responsibility? The weight of his question hit me fully. Not just translating conversations, but conducting them. Speaking directly to the people holding my father prisoner, knowing that every word could determine whether he lived or died. Yes, sir. Even if they make threats? Even if they describe in detail what they're planning to do to the prisoners? My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. Yes, sir. He studied me for another moment, then turned to the room. Major Williams, I want a secure communication line established. Dr. Kim, prepare psychological profiles based on Ms. Thorne's translations. Torres, coordinate with satellite reconnaissance for real-time visual confirmation of the target area. As the room erupted into organized activity, General Morrison pulled me aside. Ms. Thorne, before we proceed, I need to ask you something personal. I nodded. Your father doesn't know about your work here, does he? No, sir. Classification levels prevent me from discussing it. And he's been critical of your career choices? I almost smiled at the understatement. He thinks I waste my time on foreign squiggles, sir. The general's expression softened slightly. I've known Jackson Thorne for 15 years. He's one of the finest soldiers I've ever served with. But he's also stubborn, traditional, and sometimes blind to anything outside his own experience. He paused, choosing his words carefully. What I'm about to tell you stays in this room. Your father has been recommended for promotion to Brigadier General 3 times. Each time he's turned it down because he says he's not ready to stop doing field work. The man is 62 years old and still volunteers for the most dangerous assignments we have. I stared at him, unsure where this was going. My point is, Jackson Thorne defines himself by his service to his country. He measures everyone, including his daughter, by the same standard. Not because he doesn't love you, but because it's the only way he knows how to show respect. The words hit harder than I expected. Sir, why are you telling me this? Because in about 10 minutes you're going to be doing something that requires the same kind of courage your father shows every day in the field. You're going to risk everything to save American lives, using skills that took years to develop and dedication that most people can't understand. He placed a hand on my shoulder. And when this is over, when Jackson Thorne learns that his daughter's worthless party tricks saved his life and the lives of his men, I want you to remember that he's going to be the proudest father in the United States military. Before I could respond, Lieutenant Torres called out from across the room. General, we have a secure line established. Miss Thorne, we're ready when you are. I looked at the communication equipment, then at the screens full of intelligence data I'd helped gather, then at the team of military professionals who were trusting me with the most important conversation of my life. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Let's bring my father home, I said. The secure communication equipment looked deceptively simple, a modified military radio with encryption capabilities and a direct satellite uplink. But sitting in front of it, knowing that my next words could determine whether my father lived or died, it felt like the most complicated piece of technology ever created. Remember, Dr. Kim said quietly, establish yourself as someone with authority. Don't ask for permission or apologize for interrupting their timeline. You're calling because you have something they want. Major Williams handed me a headset with a built-in voice modulator. This will mask your identity and location. As far as they know, you could be calling from the Pentagon or the State Department. General Morrison stood behind me, his presence both reassuring and intimidating. Miss Thorne, you have full authority to negotiate within the parameters we discussed. If they ask questions you can't answer, refer them to higher command, and will conference in the appropriate personnel." I nodded, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. Around the room, a dozen military personnel monitored various screens: satellite feeds, communication intercepts, threat assessments. Everyone was ready, except me. "Frequency locked in," Lieutenant Torres announced, broadcasting on the channel they've been using for internal communications. I took a deep breath and keyed the microphone. Speaking in fluent Mandarin, I said, "This is United States Military Command calling the Valdorian Mountain Operation. Please respond." Static filled the room for nearly 30 seconds. Then a woman's voice, cautious but clear, "This is Mountain Base. Identify yourself." "I am authorized to negotiate for the return of American personnel currently in your custody. Are you prepared to discuss terms?" Another pause, longer this time. I could hear muffled conversation in the background, the woman conferring with others. "American Command," she said finally, "you are early. Our timeline specified dawn tomorrow." "Timelines change when American soldiers are threatened with torture," I replied evenly. "We're prepared to resolve this situation now, tonight, in a way that serves everyone's interests." The silence that followed was different, sharper, more focused. I'd gotten their attention. "You know about the enhancement protocols," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "We know about a lot of things. We know you're working with Russian intelligence. We know this wasn't your primary mission. We know you need to resolve this situation quickly before it becomes a diplomatic disaster for both our countries." Dr. Kim gave me a thumbs up. "Establishing knowledge and control." "What do you propose?" the woman asked. "Safe return of all American personnel in exchange for information about your operation's scope and objectives. No torture, no interrogation, no attempts to extract classified intelligence." "And why would we agree to that?" I glanced at General Morrison, who nodded encouragingly. "Because you're smart enough to know that torturing American Special Operations personnel will bring consequences you can't control. Because you need to complete your actual mission without the distraction of managing high-value prisoners. And because we're offering you something more valuable than anything you could extract from Colonel Thorne. Which is a clean exit, no military retaliation, no diplomatic protests, no international incident. You return our people, we pretend this conversation never happened, and you continue your work in Valdoria without interference." The background conversation grew more animated. I could make out fragments, someone arguing about Beijing's requirements, and another voice insisting they needed to minimize exposure. "You cannot guarantee non-interference," the woman said finally. "I can guarantee that torturing American soldiers will result in immediate and overwhelming retaliation. But I can also guarantee that returning them safely will result in administrative oversight. Bureaucratic delays. The kind of slow, inefficient response that gives you time to complete your objectives and withdraw." It was a calculated gamble. I was essentially offering them a head start in exchange for my father's life. "What information do you want in return?" she asked. "Nothing classified, nothing that compromises your operational security. Just confirmation of your presence, your timeline, and your intended withdrawal date. Information we'll discover eventually anyway, but receiving it now saves everyone time and resources." General Morrison was nodding approvingly. We weren't asking for anything that would actually harm their mission. Just enough intelligence to justify the exchange to our superiors. "I need to consult with my commanders," the woman said. "You have 30 minutes, I replied. "After that, our offer expires and we move to alternative solutions." The line went dead. The room erupted in controlled conversation, people analyzing what they'd heard, updating threat assessments, preparing contingency plans. I sat back in my chair, adrenaline making my hands shake slightly. "That was excellent work," Dr. Kim said. "You established authority, offered face-saving alternatives, and created urgency without appearing desperate." "Did I push too hard with the 30-minute deadline?" I asked. "No," General Morrison said firmly. They need to know we're serious. But Miss Thorne, be prepared. They might come back with counteroffers or additional demands." Lieutenant Torres looked up from his workstation. "General, satellite imagery shows increased movement around their position. Looks like they're repositioning personnel." "Defensive positions or preparation for withdrawal?" Major Williams asked. "Hard to tell. Could be either." I studied the satellite feed, trying to read the tactical situation. If they're preparing to move the prisoners, that's actually good news. It means they're considering the exchange seriously. "Or they're preparing to eliminate evidence," General Morrison said grimly. The next 25 minutes felt like hours. I rehearsed possible responses to various scenarios, reviewed the intelligence we'd gathered, and tried not to think about the fact that my father's life depended on my next conversation with people I couldn't see, in a language he'd spent years mocking. "Incoming transmission," Torres announced. I put the headset back on, my heart hammering. "This is U.S. Military Command." "American negotiator," the woman's voice was more formal now. "We have consulted with higher authority. We are prepared to discuss your proposal, but we have additional requirements." "I'm listening." "The exchange will occur at dawn, as originally planned. Location will be the valley floor. Grid coordinates we will provide. You will send one representative, unarmed, to receive the prisoners. And in return, we provide confirmation of our operational timeline and withdrawal schedule. But we also require assurance that there will be no surveillance or tracking of our departure." I looked at General Morrison, who shook his head slightly. "We can guarantee no immediate pursuit, but we cannot prevent routine intelligence gathering in the region." "That is acceptable," she said. "However, there is one more condition." My stomach dropped. There was always one more condition. "The American representative must have authority to confirm that no retaliation will occur. We need someone who can speak for your government." General Morrison stepped forward and took the microphone. "This is General Morrison, Joint Operations Command. I have the authority you're requesting." "General Morrison," the woman said, and I could hear the surprise in her voice. "We did not expect such high-level involvement. When American soldiers are threatened, we involve whatever level is necessary. Do we have an agreement?" "We do. Dawn, tomorrow. We will transmit coordinates in 2 hours. The prisoners will be released unharmed in exchange for the assurances discussed." "General," I said quickly before he could end the transmission, "I want to confirm the condition of the prisoners." "They are unharmed," the woman replied. The enhancement protocols were discussed, but not implemented. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. "Thank you," General Morrison said. "We'll see you at dawn." The line went dead and the room erupted in cautious celebration. We'd done it. We'd negotiated the release of my father and his team without violence, without torture, without an international incident. But as I sat there, surrounded by military professionals who were treating me like I'd just accomplished something extraordinary, I realized something that made my chest tight with emotion. Tomorrow morning, when my father walked free from that mountain valley, he still wouldn't know that his daughter's worthless party tricks had saved his life. The coordinates came through at 0347 hours. Transmitted in a brief, encrypted burst that Lieutenant Torres decoded within minutes. The exchange location was a natural clearing in the valley floor, surrounded by dense forest and accessible by a single dirt road that wound down from the mountain ridge. "It's actually a smart choice," Major Williams said, studying the satellite imagery. "Multiple escape routes for them, limited approach options for us, and enough open space that both sides can verify no one's hiding reinforcements." General Morrison had called in additional personnel overnight, a medical team, tactical specialists, and what he diplomatically referred to as diplomatic observers, who looked suspiciously like CIA operatives. The small war room had transformed into a full command center. But despite all the activity around me, I felt strangely isolated. My job was essentially done. I'd conducted the negotiation, secured the agreement, and provided the linguistic expertise that made the exchange possible. Now I was supposed to sit back and watch other people execute the plan. Miss Thorne, Dr. Kim approached with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. You should try to get some rest. You've been awake for over 20 hours. I can't sleep, I admitted, not until I know he's safe. She sat down beside me. Can I ask you something personal? I nodded. When this is over, when your father learns what you did tonight, what do you think he'll say? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on saving his life that I hadn't really thought about what would happen afterward. Honestly, he'll probably find a way to make it about military strategy instead of linguistics. He'll say any competent intelligence officer could have done the same thing. Dr. Kim frowned. That would be incredibly unfair. It would be typical, I corrected. My father measures everything by military standards. To him, what I did tonight was just doing my job. The fact that it happened to save his life won't change his opinion about language studies being less valuable than, quote, real military service. Before she could respond, General Morrison called out across the room. People, we have movement at the target site. Miss Thorne, I need you on comms in case there are any last-minute communications. I hurried back to my workstation, where the communication equipment was monitoring multiple frequencies. On the main screen, satellite imagery showed small figures moving around the valley clearing, setting up what looked like a temporary perimeter. General, Lieutenant Torres reported, we're also picking up vehicle movement on the access road. Looks like they're bringing the prisoners down from their holding location. My heart started racing. After hours of abstract planning and negotiation, this was becoming real. My father was somewhere in those mountains, probably unaware that his rescue had been orchestrated by the daughter whose career he'd spent years dismissing. Incoming transmission, Torres announced. I put on the headset. The same woman's voice came through. American command, we are in position. Your representative should approach from the southern access road. Come alone as agreed. Understood, General Morrison replied. We'll be there in 30 minutes. General, I said as he prepared to leave, I want to be there. He paused. Miss Thorne, that wasn't part of the agreement. You've done your job. Sir, with respect, if there are any communication problems, any misunderstandings that require immediate translation, you'll need me there. Besides, I added, I think I've earned the right to see this through. Major Williams started to object, but General Morrison held up a hand. She's right. If something goes wrong with the language barrier, we can't afford delays. He looked at me seriously. But you stay in the vehicle until the exchange is complete. This is still a potentially hostile situation. 20 minutes later, I was in the passenger seat of an armored SUV, watching the sun rise over the Valdorian mountains as we descended the winding access road. General Morrison sat behind me with 2 other officers, all of them armed despite the agreement to come unarmed. Insurance, he'd explained. The valley opened up before us like something from a postcard, rolling meadows surrounded by dense forest, morning mist clinging to the tree line. Under different circumstances, it would have been beautiful. Contact, the driver announced. 3 vehicles at the far end of the clearing. Through binoculars, I could see them, black SUVs positioned in a defensive triangle, with figures in tactical gear maintaining a perimeter. And there, in the center of the clearing, a small group of people who had to be the prisoners. I can see them, General Morrison said quietly. 4 men in military fatigues. They appear to be unrestrained but under guard. My hands shook as I adjusted my own binoculars. Even at this distance, I could make out my father's distinctive posture, straight-backed, alert, scanning the area with the professional assessment of someone who'd spent 30 years in dangerous situations. We stopped about 50 meters from the opposing group. General Morrison checked his sidearm and stepped out of the vehicle. Remember, he said to me through the open door, you stay here unless I specifically call for you. I watched him walk across the clearing, his stride confident despite being outnumbered and outgunned. The woman I'd been talking to, Asian, probably in her 40s, wearing civilian clothes but moving like military, met him halfway. They spoke for several minutes, too far away for me to hear the conversation. I saw her gesture toward the prisoners, saw General Morrison nod and reach for something in his jacket, probably the written confirmation of our agreement. Then something went wrong. The woman stepped back abruptly, speaking rapidly into a radio. Her body language changed from professional to aggressive. General Morrison raised his hands slightly, clearly trying to de-escalate whatever had just happened. "What's going on?" I asked the driver. "I don't know, but something's not right." Through the binoculars, I could see the guards around my father's group raising their weapons slightly. Not pointing them at the prisoners, but making them more readily accessible. The woman was still talking on her radio, becoming more agitated. Then she walked back to General Morrison and said something that made his posture stiffen. My father had noticed the change in tension too. Even from this distance, I could see him talking to the other prisoners, probably preparing them for the possibility that the exchange might go badly. The woman pulled out what looked like a satellite phone and held it toward General Morrison. He spoke into it briefly, then looked back at our vehicle and gestured for me to join them. "She wants to speak with the original negotiator," the driver said, monitoring radio traffic. "Something about verification." I got out of the SUV on trembling legs. This wasn't part of the plan. Walking across that open ground, knowing that armed operatives from 2 different countries were watching my every step, was one of the most terrifying things I'd ever done. But as I approached the center of the clearing, something else overpowered the fear. My father had noticed me walking toward the group. Even at 30 meters, I could see the confusion on his face. What was his daughter doing in the middle of a military operation in the mountains of Valdoria? "The verification problem," the woman said in Mandarin as I reached them, "is that Beijing has questions about your authority level. They want confirmation that last night's negotiator has genuine decision-making power." I replied in the same language. "I have the authority that was agreed upon. What additional verification do they require?" "They want to know your identity and position within the American intelligence structure." My heart sank. If I identified myself by name and position, if this conversation was being recorded or transmitted, my cover would be blown. Worse, my father was close enough now to hear everything. But as I stood there, looking across the clearing at the man who'd spent years dismissing my career as worthless, I realized something important. I didn't care about the cover anymore. "Tell Beijing," I said clearly in Mandarin that carried across the morning air, "that the negotiator is Riley Thorne, senior linguistic analyst with the Defense Language Institute, specializing in Mandarin Chinese and strategic communication. And tell them that Colonel Jackson Thorne, currently under your guard, is my father." The woman's eyes widened slightly. Behind her, I could see my father's expression change from confusion to complete shock. "You're the colonel's daughter?" she asked. "I'm the colonel's daughter who's been preventing international incidents through accurate translation for the past 6 years, I replied. "And I'm the person who's going to walk out of this valley with him and his men exactly as we agreed." The silence that followed my declaration felt like it lasted forever. I could see my father's face clearly now, 30 meters away, and the expression there was something I'd never seen before. Complete bewilderment mixed with what might have been the beginning of understanding. The woman was speaking rapidly into her satellite phone, relaying my identity to her superiors in Beijing. I caught fragments of the conversation. "Colonel's daughter, Defense Language Institute, 6 years experience, original negotiator confirmed." General Morrison stepped closer to me, his voice low. "Miss Thorne, are you certain about revealing your identity? There could be significant security implications." "Sir, the security implications of a failed prisoner exchange are worse than a blown cover," I replied, keeping my eyes on the group of prisoners. "Besides, I'm tired of hiding what I do from the people who matter most." The woman ended her call and turned back to us. "Beijing is surprised by this development. They want assurance that this is not some kind of deception." "What kind of assurance?" I asked. "They want you to demonstrate your linguistic capabilities. Prove that you are who you claim to be." I almost laughed. After 6 years of hiding my professional competence from my father, I was about to be forced to display it in front of him, armed enemy operatives and a U.S. general. "What kind of demonstration?" I asked in Mandarin. She responded in rapid-fire Beijing dialect, speaking faster than normal conversation using technical military terminology and regional idioms that would trip up most translators. "If you are truly a senior analyst, you will understand that our operation here involves coordination with multiple intelligence services, timeline pressures from party leadership, and extraction protocols that must be completed before American satellite surveillance can track our withdrawal routes to the secondary staging area near the Romanian border." I turned to General Morrison and translated without missing a beat. She says their operation involves multiple intelligence services working under timeline pressure from Chinese leadership. They need to extract before our satellites can track them to a secondary location near the Romanian border. The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. That was accurate. "I've been doing this for 6 years, I said simply. Is Beijing satisfied? She spoke into the phone again, then nodded. The exchange can proceed. But as she gestured toward the prisoners, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the guards near my father's group was speaking into his own radio, and his body language was all wrong, tense, agitated, like he was receiving information he didn't want to hear. The woman noticed it too. Her expression shifted from professional courtesy to concern as she listened to something coming through her earpiece. "There is a problem," she said. "What kind of problem?" General Morrison demanded. "Our perimeter scouts report American military vehicles approaching from the northern ridge. Multiple vehicles, moving in tactical formation." My heart sank. "General, did you?" "No," he said firmly. "I followed the agreement exactly. No backup, no pursuit teams." The woman was speaking urgently into her radio now, clearly receiving updated intelligence from multiple sources. Her calm professionalism was cracking. "How many vehicles?" I asked in Mandarin. 6 trucks, 2 helicopters maintaining distance but within strike range," she replied automatically, then seemed to realize she'd just given away tactical information. I translated for General Morrison, whose face had gone pale. "Someone broke the agreement," he said, "but it wasn't us." "Sir," I said, "what if it's not our people?" He looked at me sharply. "What do you mean?" "She mentioned Russian operatives earlier. What if Moscow decided to clean up loose ends?" The woman had apparently reached the same conclusion. She was shouting orders in Mandarin to her team, and I could see the guards around the prisoners becoming more agitated. "She's ordering defensive positions," I translated. "She thinks the approaching vehicles are hostile to her operation." "American negotiators," the woman called out. "We must conclude this exchange immediately. The tactical situation has become unstable." But even as she spoke, I could see her team splitting their attention between us and the tree line where the approaching vehicles would emerge. The careful choreography of the prisoner exchange was dissolving into potential chaos. "Riley!" The voice cut across the clearing like a gunshot. My father had broken away from the group of prisoners and was striding toward us, ignoring the guards who were shouting at him to stay back. "Dad, don't!" I started to call out, but he was already halfway across the clearing. "Colonel Thorne, return to your position," General Morrison barked. "Like hell," my father replied, not slowing down. "That's my daughter in the middle of a hostile negotiation, and I want to know what the hell is going on." The woman looked between me and my approaching father, clearly trying to process this family drama in the middle of an increasingly complex tactical situation. "Explain this to me," my father demanded as he reached us. "Riley, what are you doing here? How do you know their language? Why is a general taking orders from you?" Before I could answer, the sound of engines became audible from the northern tree line. Everyone in the clearing turned toward the noise, weapons being readied on both sides. "Dad, I need you to go back with the other prisoners," I said urgently. "This situation is about to get very dangerous. I'm not going anywhere until someone explains why my daughter is negotiating with foreign operatives in perfect Chinese." "It's Mandarin," I corrected automatically, and I'm negotiating because I work for the Defense Language Institute. I've been a military contractor for 6 years, specializing in preventing exactly this kind of international incident. He stared at me like I'd just announced I was an alien. You work for the military? I work for the military, Dad. I have top-secret clearance. I translate intercepted communications and conduct hostage negotiations. Those quote, worthless party tricks you've been mocking? They're how I serve my country. The woman was gesturing frantically at her team now, clearly preparing for the arrival of the unknown vehicles. American command, we must complete the exchange now or abort entirely. We're not aborting, I said firmly. Colonel Thorne, take your men and move toward General Morrison's vehicle now. Riley. Now, Dad. That's an order from someone with the authority to give it. For a moment I thought he might argue, but something in my voice, maybe the same tone he used when giving orders in the field, made him nod curtly and gesture to his men. As the prisoners started moving toward our vehicle, the first of the unknown trucks emerged from the tree line. It wasn't flying American flags. Russian military vehicles, General Morrison said grimly. This just became a three-way standoff. The woman was screaming orders in Mandarin now, her careful operational plan disintegrating into emergency protocols. Her team was taking defensive positions, clearly preparing for a firefight they hadn't expected. She's ordering her people to prepare for engagement, I translated. But she's also saying something about protecting the intelligence asset. I think they still want the information they thought Dad had. Which means they can't just abandon the exchange, General Morrison concluded. General, I said, watching the Russian vehicles deploy in what looked like an encirclement pattern, I think we walked into something much bigger than a prisoner exchange. I think we just stumbled into the middle of an intelligence operation that's about to go very, very wrong. The woman approached us one final time, her professional composure completely gone. American negotiators, the situation has become untenable. We cannot guarantee anyone's safety if those vehicles contain hostile forces. Then we all have a mutual interest in getting out of here alive, I replied in Mandarin. What do you propose? She looked at the approaching Russian vehicles, then at my father and his men, then at me. Temporary cooperation, she said, until we can determine the Russian intentions. I was about to translate when my father stepped forward. Riley, whatever you're discussing with her, decide fast. Because those Russians are about to be close enough to start shooting, and we're all standing in the middle of an open field. For the first time in my adult life, my father was looking at me like I was the expert in the situation. Like he was waiting for me to make the decision that would keep everyone alive. The daughter he'd dismissed as a dreamer was suddenly the person everyone was turning to for answers. The Russian vehicles had formed a loose perimeter around the clearing, engines still running, but no one had emerged yet. It was the kind of tactical positioning that suggested they were either preparing for negotiation or getting ready to eliminate everyone present. In my 6 years of intelligence work, I'd learned that the difference between those two options often came down to who spoke first and how they said it. Riley, General Morrison said quietly, what's your assessment of the situation? 3 weeks ago, my father had been lecturing me about getting a real job. Now a U.S. general was asking for my tactical analysis, while my father stood close enough to hear every word. The Russians are maintaining distance, which suggests they want to talk before they shoot, I said, watching the vehicles through binoculars. But they're also positioned to prevent anyone from leaving, which means they have their own agenda here. The Chinese woman, I still didn't know her name, was speaking rapidly into her radio while her team maintained defensive positions behind their vehicles. I caught fragments of her conversation: orders to maintain position, requests for guidance from Beijing, and something about protecting operational assets. She's asking Beijing whether to engage or withdraw, I translated for General Morrison. But withdrawal isn't really an option anymore. They're surrounded too. My father moved closer, And for the first time in years, he wasn't looking at me with disappointment or dismissal. He was looking at me like a soldier looks at another soldier whose expertise might keep everyone alive. "Riley," he said, "can you understand what the Russians want?" "I speak some Russian, but not fluently. If they want to communicate, they'll probably use English or—" A damplified voice cut across the clearing, speaking in accented but clear English. "All personnel in the valley, this is Colonel Dmitry Volkov, Russian Federation Armed Forces. You are ordered to maintain your current positions while we assess the situation." General Morrison stepped forward. "Colonel Volkov, this is General Morrison, United States Military. We are conducting a legitimate prisoner exchange under international protocols. Your presence here is unauthorized." "General Morrison," the Russian voice replied, "our presence here is very much authorized. We have intelligence indicating that classified American military technology has been compromised in this region. We are here to ensure that such technology does not fall into unauthorized hands." I felt my stomach drop. "General, they're not here about the prisoner exchange. They think Dad's unit found something." "What kind of something?" my father asked. Before I could answer, the Chinese woman approached us again, her calm professionalism replaced by barely controlled urgency. She spoke in rapid Mandarin. "The Russians are here for the same intelligence we sought. They believe the American reconnaissance unit discovered our primary operation. If they take the prisoners for interrogation—" I translated quickly. "She says the Russians want to interrogate your unit about whatever you discovered during your reconnaissance mission. They think you found evidence of their primary operation here." My father's expression hardened. "What primary operation?" The woman hesitated, then spoke in English for the first time. "Joint intelligence facility, Chinese technology, Russian personnel, very sensitive. Your unit was too thorough in their investigation." General Morrison's face went pale. "A joint facility? In Valdorian territory?" "Valdoria provides convenient neutral ground," she said. "But your reconnaissance team discovered more than we expected. Now everyone has complications." The Russian voice came over the loudspeaker again. "We are prepared to resolve this situation diplomatically, but we require immediate cooperation from all parties. Any attempt to leave the area will be considered hostile action." I looked around the clearing. Chinese operatives behind one set of vehicles, Russian forces surrounding the perimeter, American military personnel caught in the middle, and 4 rescued prisoners who'd stumbled into something much bigger than anyone had realized. "This is about to become a major international incident," I said to General Morrison. "If the Russians interrogate Dad's unit and discover details about American intelligence capabilities, or if the Chinese think we're going to expose their joint operation, it becomes a diplomatic nightmare that could affect relations between all 3 countries," he finished. My father stepped closer. "Riley, what do you recommend?" The question caught me completely off guard. Colonel Jackson Thorne, the man who'd spent 6 years telling me my career was worthless, was asking for my professional recommendation in a crisis situation. "We need to control the narrative," I said, my mind racing through possibilities. "Right now, all 3 sides think the others have information they can't afford to lose. But what if we change that assumption?" "How?" "By making it clear that keeping this quiet serves everyone's interests better than escalating it into a public confrontation." General Morrison nodded slowly. "Multi-party negotiation." "Exactly. But it has to be conducted by someone all 3 sides trust to maintain confidentiality." The Chinese woman was listening to our conversation with obvious interest. "You propose to mediate between 3 intelligence services?" "I propose to facilitate a conversation that prevents this from becoming front-page news in every major newspaper," I replied in Mandarin, then switched to English. "Because right now, the biggest threat to all of our operations isn't each other. It's exposure." The Russian loudspeaker crackled again. "American personnel, we are prepared to discuss terms for resolving this situation." We propose that one representative from each party meet to establish parameters for mutual discretion. General Morrison looked at me. Miss Thorne, are you prepared to represent American interests in a three-way intelligence negotiation? 6 years ago, I'd been a recent college graduate taking my first job at the Defense Language Institute, hoping to prove that my language skills had practical value. Now I was being asked to prevent an international incident between three major world powers. Yes, sir, I said. My father was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between amazement and pride. Riley, when this is over, you and I need to have a very long conversation about what you actually do for a living. Dad, when this is over, I promise I'll tell you everything I'm legally allowed to share. The Chinese woman had been monitoring radio communications from her team. My superiors in Beijing are willing to participate in trilateral discussions, but they insist on certain guarantees about operational security. What kind of guarantees? I asked. No recordings, no written agreements, no acknowledgement that this meeting ever took place. And all parties must commit to maintaining existing operational boundaries without interference. I translated her conditions for General Morrison, who considered them for a moment. Acceptable, assuming the Russians agree to similar terms. The Russian voice came over the loudspeaker. Colonel Volkov will meet with designated representatives in the center of the clearing in 10 minutes. Come unarmed and prepared to discuss mutually beneficial solutions. As I prepared to walk into the middle of what could be the most important negotiation of my career, my father caught my arm. Riley, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. A big one, but first I need you to know something. What? I've been wrong about a lot of things, but I've never been wrong about being proud of you. I didn't understand what you were accomplishing. For a moment, I couldn't speak. 6 years of feeling like a disappointment. 6 years of believing my father thought I was wasting my life, and now he was telling me he'd been proud all along. We'll talk after I prevent World War III, I said, trying to keep my voice light. That's my daughter, he said, and for the first time in years, it sounded like a compliment instead of a resignation. As I walked toward the center of the clearing to meet with representatives of 3 intelligence services, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't just Riley Thorne anymore, trying to prove her worth to a disapproving father. I was senior linguistic analyst Riley Thorne, and I had a job to do. The center of the clearing felt like the eye of a hurricane, eerily calm while surrounded by the potential for catastrophic violence. 3 folding chairs had been arranged in a triangle, a makeshift diplomatic setting that would have been almost comical if the stakes weren't so enormous. Colonel Dmitry Volkov emerged from the lead Russian vehicle, and I immediately understood why Moscow had sent him for this operation. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of bearing that suggested decades of handling delicate situations. More importantly, he walked like someone comfortable with command authority, the kind of person who could make binding agreements on behalf of his government. The Chinese representative was the woman I'd been negotiating with, but now I learned her name, Director Liu Wei, Ministry of State Security. She approached the meeting point with 2 tablets and what looked like a secure satellite phone, clearly prepared for real-time consultation with Beijing. As for me, I carried a notepad, a pen, and 6 years of experience in preventing exactly this kind of international disaster. It felt inadequate, but it was all I had. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Volkov began in precise English, I propose we dispense with diplomatic niceties and address our mutual problem directly. We are all here because of overlapping intelligence operations that have created complications. Director Liu nodded. Colonel Volkov is correct. The situation requires immediate resolution before it attracts unwanted attention from other parties. What other parties? I asked. NATO intelligence, European Union security services, various news organizations, Volkov replied. A 3-way military standoff in Valdorian territory will not remain secret for long. I looked between them, processing the implications. So all three of our governments have the same priority right now, keeping this incident classified. Precisely, Director Liu said. But classification requires mutual understanding of operational boundaries. Colonel Volkov pulled out a tablet and showed us a detailed map of the region. The joint facility that Director Liu mentioned operates under a carefully negotiated agreement between Moscow and Beijing. Your reconnaissance team discovered its existence, which creates exposure risks. What kind of facility? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew. Signal intelligence collection, primarily focused on European communications, Director Liu said carefully. Nothing that directly threatens American interests, but something that requires discretion. I felt a chill of understanding. You're intercepting NATO communications. We are monitoring regional communications for defensive purposes, Colonel Volkov corrected. But yes, some of that intelligence involves your allies. This was much bigger than a simple prisoner exchange. Dad's reconnaissance unit had stumbled across a major intelligence operation that could affect American relationships with European allies, Russian strategic capabilities, and Chinese influence in the region. Here's what I don't understand, I said. If this facility serves both Russian and Chinese interests, why the confrontation? Why not just let us take our people and leave? Director Liu and Colonel Volkov exchanged glances. There was something they weren't telling me. The complication, Director Liu said slowly, is that your reconnaissance team obtained photographic evidence and electronic intelligence samples before their capture. Evidence that could compromise not just our operation, but our technological capabilities. And, I prompted. And some of that technology is American in origin, Colonel Volkov finished. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. You're saying Dad's team found evidence that you're using stolen American technology to spy on American allies? We are saying, Director Liu corrected carefully, that the intelligence your team gathered could be misinterpreted by parties not familiar with the full context of our agreement. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the full scope of what I'd walked into. This wasn't just about prisoner exchange or even intelligence operations. This was about preventing a revelation that could destabilize international relationships across multiple continents. Let me make sure I understand, I said slowly. You want us to return our personnel and pretend we never found evidence of your joint intelligence facility. In exchange, you'll provide assurances that your operations won't directly target American interests. That is one possible framework, Colonel Volkov said. But there's a problem with that framework, I continued. My government can't just ignore evidence of technology theft, even if exposing it would be diplomatically inconvenient. Director Liu leaned forward. What if the technology transfer was not theft, but a carefully managed intelligence sharing agreement designed to serve mutual interests? I blinked at her. Are you saying the American government knew about this? We are saying, Colonel Volkov replied, that intelligence relationships between major powers are often more complex than they appear to operational personnel. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If they were telling the truth, if this was some kind of sanctioned intelligence sharing operation, then Dad's unit hadn't discovered enemy activity. They'd discovered their own government's classified agreements. I need to consult with my superiors, I said, reaching for my secure radio. Miss Thorne, Director Liu said quietly, before you do that, you should know that Beijing has been monitoring American communications regarding this incident. Your General Morrison has been in contact with Washington throughout this situation. And Washington's instructions to him have been illuminating. Colonel Volkov activated his tablet and showed me a screen full of intercepted communications. I could see message headers indicating traffic between General Morrison and what looked like Pentagon intelligence officials. We cannot show you the content without violating operational security, he said. But we can tell you that your government's priority appears to be resolution rather than exposure. I felt like I was standing on shifting sand. Everything I thought I understood about this situation was being reframed by people who clearly knew more than they were telling me. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "A mutual understanding," Director Liu said. "Your reconnaissance team returns safely to American control. The intelligence they gathered is classified at the highest levels and never officially acknowledged. Our operations continue within agreed parameters, and all parties maintain plausible deniability about this entire incident." "And the joint facility?" "Remains operational under existing agreements," Colonel Volkov said. "Agreements that apparently exist at levels above both our operational authorities." I looked across the clearing toward where my father stood with General Morrison and the other rescued personnel. He was watching the negotiation with obvious concern, probably wondering why his daughter was sitting at a table with foreign intelligence operatives like she belonged there. "There's one more thing you should know," Director Liu said, following my gaze. "Your father's reconnaissance was extraordinarily thorough. His team didn't just discover our facility. They identified its full operational capacity, personnel structure, and technological capabilities. That level of intelligence gathering suggests his mission parameters were more extensive than routine reconnaissance." "What are you saying?" "We are saying," Colonel Volkov replied, "that Colonel Thorne may have been sent here specifically to assess our operation, which would suggest that someone in Washington wanted confirmation of something they already suspected." I stared at them both, trying to process what they were implying. If Dad's mission had been specifically designed to discover the joint facility, if Washington had suspected its existence all along, then this entire crisis might have been orchestrated to create exactly this kind of negotiation. "You're suggesting this whole situation was planned?" "We are suggesting," Director Liu said carefully, "that intelligence operations at this level rarely happen by accident." As I sat there, surrounded by representatives of 3 intelligence services, I realized that I might not be negotiating the resolution of an international incident. I might be implementing one. The weight of what I'd just learned settled over me like a lead blanket. If Colonel Volkov and Director Liu were telling the truth, then I wasn't just Riley Thorne trying to save her father anymore. I was a key player in an intelligence operation that involved the highest levels of 3 governments, and everyone in that clearing was watching to see what I would do next. I stood up from the negotiating table and walked a few steps away, ostensibly to consider the proposal but really to buy myself time to think. Through my peripheral vision, I could see my father talking urgently with General Morrison, probably trying to understand why a linguistic analyst was conducting what appeared to be high-level diplomatic negotiations. The secure radio on my belt crackled with an incoming message. "Analyst Thorne, this is Control. Please confirm your status and current situation assessment." Control. That was a designation I'd never heard before in 6 years of working for the Defense Language Institute. Someone very high up the chain was monitoring this situation in real time. I keyed the radio carefully. "Control, this is Thorne. Situation involves trilateral intelligence discussion regarding operational boundaries and information security. Request guidance on acceptable parameters for resolution." "Thorne, you are authorized to proceed with negotiations as you see fit. Full discretionary authority granted for classification and operational security decisions." Repeat. Full discretionary authority. I stared at the radio. Full discretionary authority meant I could make binding agreements on behalf of the United States government. In 6 years of contract work, I'd never been given that level of responsibility. "Control, please confirm authorization source." "Authorization comes directly from the Director's office. You have complete latitude to resolve the situation using your professional judgment." Director's office, not my supervisor at DLI, not even the Pentagon. Someone at the highest levels of American intelligence was giving me carte blanche to negotiate with foreign operatives. I walked back to the table where Colonel Volkov and Director Liu were waiting. Both of them had been monitoring their own communications during my absence, and both looked like they'd received updated instructions. "Miss Thorne," Director Liu said, "Beijing has authorized me to discuss more, comprehensive arrangements. Moscow as well, Colonel Volkov added. It appears all three governments are interested in a permanent resolution rather than a temporary accommodation. I sat down, feeling the full weight of the situation settling on my shoulders. What kind of permanent resolution? Director Liu activated her tablet and showed me what looked like a formal agreement template. Establishment of official trilateral intelligence sharing protocols. Legitimization of existing operations under formal treaty structure. And creation of oversight mechanisms to prevent future misunderstandings. You're talking about formalizing the joint facility operation, I said. We are talking about expanding it, Colonel Volkov corrected. Your government has indicated interest in direct participation rather than passive monitoring. I felt like I was falling down a rabbit hole. 3 hours ago, I'd been a translator trying to save my father's life. Now I was apparently negotiating the structure of a major international intelligence alliance. And my father's reconnaissance team would become the foundation of American participation in the expanded operation, Director Liu said. Their intelligence gathering capabilities have been impressive. I looked across the clearing again. My father was pacing now, clearly frustrated by being kept out of a conversation that was obviously about him and his mission. General Morrison was speaking into his own radio, probably receiving the same kind of high-level guidance I'd just gotten. There's one problem with your proposal, I said to both negotiators. My father doesn't know any of this. As far as he's concerned, his team stumbled into your operation by accident and got captured for their trouble. That situation can be clarified, Colonel Volkov said carefully. Clarified how? By briefing him on the true nature of his mission parameters, Director Liu explained. Colonel Thorne was selected for this reconnaissance specifically because of his reputation for operational discretion and his daughter's linguistic capabilities. I felt like I'd been hit by lightning. You're saying I was part of the mission planning from the beginning? We are saying that senior analysts with your clearance level and language skills are rare resources, Colonel Volkov said. When Washington needed someone capable of handling sensitive trilateral negotiations, your profile fit their requirements exactly. And my father's capture? Was always a possibility, Director Liu admitted, but also an opportunity to establish formal contact under controlled circumstances. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the ground. You're telling me that my father's life was put at risk as part of some elaborate diplomatic theater? We are telling you that international intelligence operations involve calculated risks, Colonel Volkov said calmly. And that your father volunteered for a mission knowing those risks, even if he didn't know all the details. Ms. Thorne, Director Liu added, your father is one of the most experienced special operations officers in the American military. He understood the implications of deep reconnaissance in sensitive territory. He may not have known the specific objectives, but he knew the dangers. I looked at them both, then at my father across the clearing, then at the communication equipment that connected me to people making decisions at the highest levels of government. For the first time in my life, I was in a position where my choices would have consequences far beyond my own family. What happens if I refuse to authorize this arrangement? I asked. Then we return to the original situation, Colonel Volkov said. Prisoner exchange, mutual silence, and continued uncertainty about operational boundaries. But the underlying tensions remain unresolved. And if I agree? Then three governments avoid a potentially damaging intelligence conflict, your father's team becomes part of a legitimate operation instead of accidental prisoners, and you become the primary American liaison for one of the most significant intelligence partnerships in modern history. Director Liu leaned forward. Ms. Thorne, you have spent 6 years using your linguistic skills to prevent international incidents. This is your opportunity to help create a framework that prevents dozens of future incidents. I walked away from the table again, this time moving close enough to the American position that I could see my father clearly. He was watching me with an expression I'd never seen before, not confusion or disappointment, but something that looked like amazement. General Morrison approached me. Miss Thorne, I've just received updated guidance from Washington. You're authorized to make whatever agreements you deem appropriate for American interests. General, did my father know about any of this? He considered the question carefully. Your father knew his mission was unusual. He knew the intelligence objectives were broader than standard reconnaissance. But no, he didn't know about the diplomatic component. And he doesn't know about my role in this? That's your decision to make, General Morrison said. But Miss Thorne, I want you to know something. In 30 years of military service, I've never seen someone handle a situation this complex with more professionalism and competence. Your father is going to be incredibly proud when he learns what you've accomplished here. I looked at my father one more time, then walked back to the negotiating table. Colonel Volkov and Director Liu were waiting patiently, but I could see the tension in their postures. Whatever I decided in the next few minutes would affect intelligence operations across 3 continents. I have conditions, I said, sitting down. We are prepared to listen, Director Liu replied. First, my father and his team are fully briefed on their new mission parameters. No more operational secrets that put them at unnecessary risk. Agreed, Colonel Volkov said. Second, I want formal oversight authority for American participation in the joint facility, not just translation services but operational input. That is acceptable, Director Liu said after checking her tablet. Third, this entire incident gets classified at the highest levels. No records, no reports, no acknowledgement that today's events ever happened. Obviously, both negotiators said simultaneously. I took a deep breath. Then we have an agreement. As I spoke those words, I realized that I had just fundamentally changed the course of international intelligence operations. And my father, the man who had spent years dismissing my career as worthless, was about to learn that his daughter had just negotiated one of the most significant intelligence agreements in modern history. The helicopter flight back to Fort Sentinel was the longest 45 minutes of my life. My father sat across from me in the military transport, still wearing his field fatigues, still processing everything that had happened in the valley. General Morrison had briefed him on the classified aspects of the operation during the drive to the landing zone, but I could see in his eyes that he was struggling to reconcile the daughter he thought he knew with the person who had just negotiated a major international intelligence agreement. The other members of his reconnaissance team, Sergeant Martinez, Corporal Johnson, and Lieutenant Hayes, kept glancing between us with barely concealed amazement. They'd been briefed too, told that their accidental capture had actually been part of a larger operation, and that the linguistic analyst who'd secured their release was Colonel Thorne's daughter. Riley, my father said finally, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's engine noise, I need you to explain something to me. What's that, Dad? How long have you been doing this? Not just the translation work, but this. He gestured vaguely, encompassing everything that had happened. Negotiating with foreign intelligence services, making decisions that affect international relationships, having direct communication with Pentagon leadership. I looked out the helicopter window at the Montana landscape passing below us. 6 years, Dad, since I started with the Defense Language Institute. And I never knew. You never asked, I said quietly. Every time I tried to tell you about my work, you changed the subject or made comments about my foreign language hobby. He was quiet for a long moment. What exactly do you do, Riley? Your real job description? Senior Linguistic Analyst, specializing in crisis communication and international incident prevention. I translate intercepted communications, conduct hostage negotiations, and provide cultural context for diplomatic operations. My security clearance is higher than most military officers. Including mine? Including yours. Sergeant Martinez leaned forward. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, how many operations like this have you been involved in? I thought about the question. This was my first trilateral negotiation, but I've handled dozens of international communications crises. hostage situations, diplomatic disputes, intelligence gathering operations. Most of them are classified, so I can't discuss details. And you've been doing this alone? My father asked. I have a team at DLI, but for field operations, yes, usually alone. Lieutenant Hayes shook his head. Colonel, your daughter just prevented a three-way international incident using nothing but language skills and negotiation expertise. That's incredible. My father looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not pride, not disappointment, but something deeper, understanding maybe, or regret. Riley, I owe you more than an apology, he said. I owe you everything. Not just for today, but for 6 years of not understanding what you were contributing to your country's security. Dad, no, let me finish. He leaned forward, his voice intense. I've spent 32 years in the military, and I've never seen anyone handle pressure like you did today. You saved my life, you saved my team's lives, and you probably prevented a diplomatic crisis that could have affected relationships between major world powers. He paused, choosing his words carefully. And you did it using skills that I've been dismissing as worthless for years. Skills that turned out to be more valuable than anything I've ever done in uniform. The helicopter began its descent toward Fort Sentinel. Through the windows, I could see the base where I'd grown up, where my father had built his legendary career, where I'd always felt like I didn't belong. Dad, there's something else you should know, I said. The reason you were selected for that reconnaissance mission wasn't just because of your operational skills. It was partly because of my linguistic capabilities. Washington needed someone who could handle the diplomatic complexities if the mission went wrong. You mean? I mean, your daughter's party tricks have been part of your mission planning for longer than either of us realized. As the helicopter touched down, General Morrison activated the intercom system. Colonel Thorne, Miss Thorne, there's a debriefing scheduled for 1,400 hours, but first, I believe you both have some personal matters to discuss. The rotors wound down, and we climbed out onto the tarmac. My father's team headed toward the administrative buildings for their own debriefings, but Dad and I stood there for a moment, facing each other in the Montana afternoon sun. Riley, he said, I don't know how to make up for 6 years of being wrong about everything. You don't have to make up for anything, I said, but maybe you could try to understand that serving your country doesn't always look like wearing a uniform. He stepped forward and pulled me into a hug that felt different from any embrace we'd shared since I was a child. Not the obligatory hug of family duty, but the embrace of one professional acknowledging another. I'm proud of you, he said. I'm proud of who you've become, and I'm proud of what you do for your country. And Riley? Yeah? Next time someone asks me what my daughter does for a living, I'm going to tell them she prevents international incidents and saves American lives using skills most people can't even pronounce. I laughed, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders that I'd been carrying for years. Dad, most of what I do is still classified. Then I'll tell them you work in national security and that you're damn good at it. As we walked toward the administrative building, I realized that everything had changed. Not just our relationship, but my understanding of my own value, my place in the world, and the importance of the work I'd chosen. 3 months later, I received a commendation from the Secretary of Defense for exceptional service in preventing international diplomatic crisis through expert linguistic analysis and negotiation. The ceremony was classified, held in a small conference room with no media present, but my father was there in his dress uniform, beaming with pride. 6 months after that, I was promoted to Senior Advisor for International Communications, with an office at the Pentagon and a staff of 12 linguistic specialists. My father called me the day the promotion was announced, not to give advice or express concern about my career choices, but to ask if I needed help moving to Washington. The Joint Intelligence Facility in Valdoria continues to operate under the trilateral agreement I negotiated, and I've been involved in 3 more international incident prevention operations since then. Each time I think about that morning in the valley when my father looked at me and finally saw not his disappointing daughter, but a professional whose expertise had saved his life. The worthless party tricks he'd mocked for years turned out to be the most valuable skills either of us had ever developed. And now, when people ask Colonel Jackson Thorne about his daughter's career, he tells them she serves her country in ways most people will never understand, using abilities most people will never possess. He still doesn't fully comprehend the details of what I do. The classifications prevent that. But he understands now that language is power, that communication is strategy, and that his daughter wields both in service of American security interests around the world. Sometimes the most important victories aren't won on battlefields. Sometimes they're won in conversations that prevent battles from happening at all. And sometimes the children who seem to disappoint their parents are actually the ones preparing to save them when it matters most. My father learned that lesson in a valley in Valdoria when his life depended on his daughter's useless language skills. I learned it too, that worth isn't determined by other people's understanding, but by the impact of your actions when everything is on the line. The little girl who used to practice Mandarin characters at the kitchen table while her father dismissed her studies as worthless had become the woman who prevented international wars through the power of perfect translation. And finally, Colonel Jackson Thorne understood that his daughter hadn't been wasting her time after all. She'd been preparing to save the world, one conversation at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.